Two Joy-Con or not two Joy-Con, but like quite literally two Joy-Cons in the box or not. What's going on, everybody? It's Zach from SwitchForce. More and more floodgates open as we dive deeper into what's going to happen at the big Nintendo Switch 2 reveal. Nate Drake has supposed that maybe there's not Joy-Con after all. Digital Foundry has come in with a similar prediction, but we now have customs info that shows maybe a bigger Joy-Con actually is already being made. Hit that like button if you're excited like I am for the new era of Nintendo that is now rapidly approaching. The Joy-Con were one of the things that defined the Nintendo Switch 1. It helped set them apart and allowed them to be flexible beyond any previous system's belief. We could do tabletop mode, we could do handheld mode, we could pass one to a friend or a little brother. But the Joy-Con also had plenty of problems. Not only are they small and maybe not the most comfortable controller to use, but Joy-Con drift was something that plagued Nintendo year after year after year, and was kind of disastrous even, despite the insane success that the Switch had. I think if the system was worse, that Joy-Con drift issue would have been way more problematic. So it makes sense that Nintendo could consider removing the Joy-Con. Let's start with the no Joy-Con crowd. Nate Drake on his recent podcast said that he wonders if there will not be any Joy-Cons at all, and it'll be more similar to the likes of a ROG Ally, meaning it still is a hybrid portable machine, but the controllers are stuck on. There's no removing controllers, there's no sliding them off, there's no passing them along for multiplayer. MVG says that they weren't that big of a success and they were uncomfortable, but I wonder here if maybe this is just more hardcore players speaking. Perhaps it's not the overall sentiment that Joy-Con were not that great and uncomfortable, because we have to consider the wide range of players that make up the 140 million Switch console user base. How many people enjoyed the Joy-Con? How many people loved sharing them with family and friends? How many people actually played tabletop? I can tell you from my perspective, I don't love the Joy-Con. I stopped doing tabletop mode after the first few months, and I only play the Switch with a Pro controller now. It's the only way I do it. I won't use the Joy-Con. I find them to be uncomfortable, small, and those buttons are too darn tiny. Especially after using bigger, better buttons and bigger, better analog sticks and grips on things like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, I just don't like the Joy-Con. But Nintendo has to look at this from a very wide range of player perspectives. How many people actually did use the Joy-Con, how many liked it, and how many were brought into the Switch ecosystem because of the Joy-Con. You pass it to a friend, they think, hey, this is great, and it's an opportunity to allow multiple people in your household to play the system without having to invest in another controller. Nate Drake smartly points out the success of the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con and how Nintendo was able to sell so many different colors and so many different packs. If they opt to go for no Joy-Con, they lose out on a big chunk of the accessory market, which given the huge price of Joy-Con, probably made them a lot of money. Now, Digital Foundry feels similarly, saying, I would not be surprised to see the Joy-Con removed entirely and replaced by onboard controls. I think the Joy-Con concept was neat, it kind of worked, but in practice, I suspect that people weren't switching between them that often, and it ultimately made the machine somewhat flimsier. It was another point of failure. When holding it, it always had a little bit of wiggle to it, just a little bit, enough to think, this doesn't feel great in the hands. And I never use the Joy-Con really. When I dock, I just use the Pro controller, so I wouldn't mind that either. Now, I feel right in step with Digital Foundry here. I think it did make the system flimsier. I think that after a while, you even stop switching them out. I got a big box of like 40 Joy-Con. I don't open that thing except to show them to you in videos, which is really sad. Maybe I shouldn't have bought so many, but it's because I just don't play with the Joy-Con. So Nintendo could opt to not use the Joy-Con. In fact, it might make the thing easier to produce, not having the rails that slide on and off. It might make it a better system for ergonomics, a better system for more hardcore players, and it could provide them more comparative parity with things like the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck that do feel nicer to hold and feel nicer in the hands. But Nintendo is one to continue down the road that they began. They're also one to innovate and create new iterations on what they've already established. And a better Joy-Con, hey, that could be the best case scenario. We have this import customs data that shows Nintendo working on some kind of controller that has bigger measurements than the Joy-Con. They're very similar to the Joy-Con, but taller and what it seems like thicker. Now take a peek at this picture here, which showcases a comparison of the Switch OLED using normal Joy-Con and the Switch 2 based on the big leak that there's an 8-inch screen, an LCD screen, as part of the Switch 2's hardware. You can see that the Joy-Con would have to be bigger. They'd have to be about a ½ inch taller in order to work with this. There's no way Nintendo can slide the exact same Joy-Con onto a bigger screen and have it work without feeling awkward, cheap, and, as Digital Foundry mentioned, even more flimsy. So Nintendo could be building a bigger, better Joy-Con. I think one of the biggest problems with Joy-Con is their bigness. Obviously, fixing the drift is priority number one, but a bigger Joy-Con that allows for bigger buttons, bigger analog sticks, and a better ability to hold this thing would make a lot of difference. Now, you talk about the dimensions for the thickness, and it seems like it could have really big grips. Now, that could be very interesting, and we've seen different controllers sort of try this out from different companies, not Nintendo. The Hori Split Pad Pro is one that I really liked for a long time, and those are big chonkers. I'm not saying Nintendo needs to go that thick, but there's nothing wrong with getting a little more ergonomic. And I do think that the Joy-Con provide a very unique flair for the Switch. I think it helps separate the system from any other system out there, and I do think that the accessory sales are something Nintendo really covets. I also wonder how you ever make a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite if there's nothing to make light about it, right? Like the difference between the Switch and the Switch Lite is that, oh, there's no Joy-Con, you can't do that tabletop stuff, it doesn't dock. But if there's no Joy-Con, then what? You just have a smaller Switch 2 that has a smaller screen and doesn't dock? Feels like a much messier way to handle having different iterations of the same console. I do think Nintendo will keep the Joy-Con. It does very much seem like both Digital Foundry and Nate Drake are speculating. They do not know, they're just hypothesizing, and maybe they're a bit biased because most of the hardcore scene that's watching YouTube videos, reading articles, listening to podcasts, they don't use Joy-Con as much. Joy-Con are definitely much more tilted towards the casual consumer. But remember, Nintendo's most successful systems have always embraced the casual consumer, and accessibility is something that's huge for Nintendo in terms of spreading their player base very far and wide and usually very early on. I think Nintendo will keep the Joy-Con but improve them, make them better. The other thing you have to consider is if Nintendo were not to include Joy-Con on the Switch, they then would need to give you another controller. You can't sell a dockable system that has no means of controlling when docked. And it seems like Nintendo is going to be treating this like a brand new generation, despite having backwards compatibility. This isn't just, oh, a Switch Pro. This is a whole Switch 2. Therefore, you're not going to sell the thing without a controller. How much do they lose by having to include a Pro controller instead of just baking in the Joy-Con? I think Nintendo will stick with the Joy-Con, and I think Nintendo will make them improved. They can't possibly be the exact same because the system is going to be bigger. How would that thing fit on? And here's the sad part. Nintendo wants to sell you new controllers again. If all your past controllers work, there's no incentive to ever make more colors, ever buy them again, ever get special editions. But with new Joy-Con and new Pro controllers, you can have the best of all money-making worlds. Nintendo's ultimate purpose is to Scrooge McDuck it up. And unfortunately for us, we're probably going to be buying new systems, new Joy-Con, and new Pro controllers with enhanced features, maybe better ergonomics and some new bells and whistles. But I fully think Nintendo will embrace the fact that they can sell you all these accessories yet again, and all the third-party accessory makers can sell you new accessories again themselves. That is a lot of cash to leave on the table by A, not including Joy-Con, B, making it the same Joy-Con, or C, having to include a Pro controller already in every console box. So what is your take on Joy-Con or no Joy-Con for Switch 2? Do you think that it won't happen, or do you think that is a bit of hardcore player bias and Nintendo absolutely will be making new Joy-Con, and those customs dimensions really lead me to believe that is going to be the case? Do you agree with it? Let me hear your take in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, stay positive out there. Love you lots. SwitchForce out.